The war was over, and Captain Sarai of the Threxian Guard sat alone in the silence of defeat. The cell was dark, its walls smooth metal, cold to the touch, without a single mark to remind her of the world she had left behind. The hum of the human warship was the only sound, a low vibration that seemed to crawl into her bones and whisper, "Lost." Lost, lost, she had once been proud. She had once stood in shining armor with her banner high, her name shouted by soldiers who followed her into battle. Now she was nothing more than a prisoner, stripped of weapons, stripped of rank, stripped even of dignity. Her claws were dull, her body bruised, and her spirit weighed down like stone. The Threxians had believed themselves unbreakable. For generations they had ruled the outer colonies with iron and fire. They thought the humans were weak, too soft, too sentimental, too divided to stand against them. And for a time it seemed true. The first battles had been victories, easy ones. Sarai had led her squad against human outposts and had returned with spoils and glory. She remembered laughing then, laughing at how quickly the humans fled, how easily they fell. But humans learned. They adapted. They endured. And when they came back, they came not as scattered prey, but as hunters. The last battle still played in Sarai's mind when she closed her eyes. The sand was red with blood, and the sky burned with the fire of orbital strikes. She had fought until her blade broke in her hands, until her armor was pierced and shattered, until her soldiers lay silent around her. She remembered the human machines, tall walkers of steel and fire, marching forward while human infantry followed close, steady and relentless. They did not cheer when they won. They did not gloat. They simply pressed on, silent, efficient, unstoppable. Sarai had thought she would die there, buried beneath the ruins of her command. She had welcomed it. Dying in battle was the honor of a warrior. But death did not come. Instead, rough hands had pulled her from the wreckage, bound her wrists, and dragged her onto the ship. And here, in this cage, she waited. She had heard stories about humans. Stories told to young Threxians around the fire, to fill them with courage and hate. Humans were described as merciless beasts, creatures who wore the skin of prey but carried the heart of predators. They would never forgive an enemy. They would never show mercy. A captured Threxian, she had been told, would never leave a human ship alive. So Sarai prepared herself for the end. She sat straight, her back against the wall, her chin lifted as though she still stood in the field with soldiers at her side. If they came for her life, she would meet them proudly. She would not beg. She would not weep. Her enemies would not see her break. The hiss of a door broke the silence. Heavy boots struck the floor in a slow, steady rhythm. Sarai's heart beat faster, but her face showed nothing. The sound grew closer, echoing in the narrow hall, until finally the cell door slid open with a sharp click. Light spilled into the dark, and a figure stepped inside. A human. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his shadow stretching long across the floor. His uniform was simple but clean, marked with symbols she did not recognize. His face was hard, his jaw rough with stubble, and his eyes, dark, unreadable, looked at her without fear. In his hands he carried a small tray, food, water. Sarai's eyes narrowed. This must be a trick. Perhaps poisoned rations, a cruel way to end her life slowly, or perhaps a final mockery. Feed the defeated captain like a beast before cutting her throat. She did not move, did not even breathe too deeply, as he set the tray down on the ground between them. The human did not speak at first. He only lowered the tray with careful, almost gentle hands, as though placing an offering before a shrine. Then his voice came low and steady. "You should eat. You won't survive on nothing, that was all. No threats, no insults, no celebration of her capture. Just plain words spoken without hate." Sarai stared at him, her thoughts twisting in confusion. This was not how enemies acted. This was not how humans were supposed to act. She had expected the cold bite of a blade, the fire of a blaster, or the silence of an executioner's stare. Instead, she found herself facing a soldier who offered food. And for the first time since her capture, Sarai did not know what to expect. For 3 days, Captain Sarai sat in silence, watching the tray of food and water. She did not touch it. She did not even look at the human when he came. The first day her body trembled from hunger and exhaustion, yet she refused to eat. Pride demanded that she endure. Survival meant nothing if it was given by the hands of an enemy. The second day, the human returned. His boots echoed in the hall, slow and careful. He placed the tray down in exactly the same spot and turned to leave. For a moment, Sarai considered lunging at him. Perhaps she could snatch a weapon or escape while he distracted her with his routine, but she had no strength left for rebellion, and the thought of attacking someone unarmed made her stomach twist. Instead, she watched him. The human's hands were steady, though she noticed the slightest tremor in his fingers. His eyes flicked briefly toward her, then away, as if he feared something she could not see. He never said a word beyond the first morning. No commands, no threats, just his quiet presence and the simple act of leaving food. The third day, Sarai could feel her strength waning. Her limbs felt heavy, her stomach hollow, and her throat dry as the sandstorms of her homeworld. Hunger gnawed at her like a living thing, sharp and insistent. Still, when the human appeared, she looked away, keeping her gaze fixed on the corner of the cell. She would not beg. She would not appear weak, but the food called to her. Even as her pride demanded resistance, her body refused to ignore its need. The human, noticing her hesitation, only paused for a moment. There was no impatience in him, no judgment. He did not scold her for refusing. He did not demand obedience. He simply placed the tray and left. Alone, Sarai allowed herself to pick up the water first. She sipped slowly, tasting its chill against her parched tongue. The sensation was almost alien. Simple, ordinary, yet comforting in a way she had not felt in weeks. Then she took a small bite of the bread. It was soft, sweet in a subtle way she did not expect. Her body responded instantly. Strength returned to her muscles, her head cleared, and for a moment she felt almost human. But the hunger in her mind was more than just for food. She wanted answers. Why would a human act this way? Her people had always described humans as cruel without empathy, relentless in punishment. Every fiber of her being told her to prepare for pain, for hatred, for death. Yet nothing came. Not yet. On the fourth morning, she found herself studying him as he entered. His expression was unreadable. He moved with purpose, yet there was a care in his steps, as if he understood the fragility of what he held before him, her life. When his eyes briefly met hers, she felt something strange, a flicker of hesitation, or perhaps concern. Why do you do this? Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. She had not spoken in 3 days. The words left her throat like a small release of tension she didn't realize she had been holding. You don't have to feed me. You could leave me here to die. Why care? The human froze. For a moment he looked at her as if considering whether to answer. Then slowly, quietly, he said, Because I'm tired of ending things. Sarai blinked. The words were simple, but they struck her in ways she could not explain. She had expected hatred, fury, triumph. Instead, she heard exhaustion, sorrow, and something human, something that acknowledged the cost of taking a life. Ending things, she repeated, tasting the phrase as if it were foreign. You mean killing? You mean me? He nodded slightly, but there was no malice. Just honesty. Just a truth that cut deeper than any blade she had faced on the battlefield. I don't want to kill you, he said. I don't want to see anyone die. But the war forced us into this. Sarai did not know what to say. Her mind was a storm of confusion. For generations, she had been taught to fear humans, to despise them, to expect only cruelty, and yet here was one human, her enemy, showing her care, showing her kindness. The tray of food lay untouched for a moment between them, a quiet bridge over the space that war had made. For the first time, Sarai wondered if perhaps humans were not what her people had described. Perhaps there was something more. Perhaps there was mercy. And that thought, dangerous and fragile, planted a seed in her heart she did not yet understand. The days passed slowly on the human warship. Time seemed to stretch, marked only by the quiet footsteps of the human who brought her food. 3 mornings had passed since their first conversation, and Captain Sarai found herself watching him more closely, though she tried not to. Her pride told her to ignore him. Her instincts screamed that every human carried the heart of a hunter, yet she could not turn away. She noticed the way he moved, careful and precise, as though every motion was measured not to harm. The way his eyes darted briefly to her face before looking away, always avoiding unnecessary contact. The way he hesitated at the door of her cell, as if even leaving her behind caused him some discomfort. There was no cruelty in him, no malice, no desire to see her suffer. Her body still ached. Bruises mottled her skin and her muscles screamed after every attempt to stand or stretch. Hunger had left a hollow emptiness inside her, but the water and bread he left helped her regain a fraction of strength each day. Still, she did not touch the tray in his presence. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her weakness. Instead, she sat quietly watching. And in the silence, her mind wandered. Why? She asked herself for the 100th time. Why would a human do this? Her species had long believed that humans were cruel, merciless, and selfish. They fought without honor and celebrated death like a festival. And yet here was one human who simply offered food, who simply said words that carried no threat. She could not understand it, and perhaps she never would. On the 4th morning, she spoke again. Her voice was softer this time, almost a whisper.
"Do you hate me?"
she asked, unable to stop the question from leaving her throat. The human paused, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in a longer, deliberate gaze. There was a pause that stretched into silence, and for a moment Sarai felt the weight of eternity pressing on her chest. Then he shook his head. "I don't hate you," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of weariness. "I hate war. I hate what it makes us do. You were following orders, same as me." Her claws, long and sharp, flexed slightly at her sides. She wanted to lash out. She wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But the words caught in her throat. She realized with a sting of reluctant awe that he was right. She had been a soldier. She had obeyed orders. She had fought for her people, and he had fought for his. For the first time since her capture, Sarai did not feel like the prisoner in the cell. She felt like a soldier staring across a battlefield at someone who had fought as she had. Only this soldier did not rejoice at her defeat. This soldier did not see her as an enemy to be destroyed. The human placed another tray on the floor, a small bowl of warm broth this time. Its scent was strange but comforting. Sarai stared at it for a long moment, torn between hunger and mistrust. She could feel her body pulling her forward, but her mind recoiled. If I take it, he wins. If I refuse, I die. She did not move immediately. She simply watched him step back toward the door, hand on the latch, and then pause. His eyes found hers once more, and in them she saw something fragile, something she had never expected to see in a human. Hesitation, concern, a flicker of care. She could not comprehend it. And yet she felt it deep in her chest like a small ember in a dark cave. The ember warmed her in ways she had not felt in weeks. The ember reminded her that not every enemy sought her death, that perhaps, just perhaps, some humans could choose mercy over cruelty. When the human left, Sarai finally reached for the bowl. She sipped the broth carefully, savoring its warmth as it slid down her throat. Each taste was a small revelation, a proof that kindness existed even in a world broken by war. She ate slowly, silently, afraid to make a sound that might betray her gratitude. But even as she ate, her mind raced. Could she trust him? Could she let herself feel this hope? Or was she already too far gone, letting the enemy soften the edges of her warrior's heart? The silence of the cell became a strange companion. It was heavy, oppressive, and yet alive with the quiet presence of the human's choices. For the first time, she realized that survival might not be enough. Perhaps in this silence she could find something more. Understanding. Perhaps she could glimpse the humanity that had always been denied to her people's stories. And in that thought, dangerous and fragile as it was, Sarai felt something stir inside her, something she had not felt since the first day of the war. Curiosity. Curiosity about the human who refused to kill her. Curiosity about the heart that dared to show kindness when all the world demanded hate. And curiosity, she realized, could be as dangerous as any blade. The 4th night in the cell, the shadows seemed heavier. The hum of the human warship vibrated through the metal walls, a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Captain Sarai sat on the cold floor, her back pressed against the wall, knees drawn close. Her muscles ached, her body was still bruised, but her mind was restless. She had survived on his food for days now. But the question that haunted her would not leave. Why? Why would a human, an enemy, show her kindness when the world expected him to destroy her? When the door hissed open, she stiffened. The human stepped in, tray in hand, and paused at the doorway as he always did. But this time Sarai did not turn her gaze away. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Why do you do this?" Her voice was rough, broken from disuse, yet edged with something more. Anger, curiosity, fear. "You don't have to feed me. You could leave me here to die. Why care?" The human stopped in his tracks. For the first time, he did not move immediately to place the tray. His eyes met hers, and she noticed the faintest flicker of hesitation. He was not cold. He was not indifferent. He looked tired, worn down by something she could not name. "Because I'm tired of ending things," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. The words struck her with a strange force. Ending things, killing, taking life. She had expected triumph, hatred, or fear in the eyes of her enemy. Instead, she saw something heavier, exhaustion. A longing for peace she had never imagined existed in the heart of a human soldier. Sarai's claws flexed at her sides. She wanted to lash out, to scream at the unfairness of it all. But the fire that usually drove her anger was muted by confusion. She had been trained to see humans as predators incapable of mercy, and yet here he was, proving everything she had been taught was wrong. You should want to kill me," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "I am your enemy. I am the last of my squad. You could end me now and be done with it." He shook his head slowly. "I don't hate you," he said. "I don't hate anyone. War makes us do terrible things. You were following orders. I was following orders. But I'm tired of the orders, tired of the deaths, tired of the world that makes enemies out of people who could have been something else." Sarai stared at him, unblinking. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed into her chest. She had always believed strength came from victory. Power came from domination. And yet, in this small, quiet act of mercy, she began to see a different kind of strength, one that required courage greater than the battlefield could ever teach. The human set the tray down on the floor, a bowl of warm broth and a piece of bread. He stepped back, hands relaxed, waiting. His eyes held hers, steady but gentle, as though he were offering her a choice without pressure, without force. For a long moment, Sarai did nothing. Hunger gnawed at her, but pride held her still. Her mind screamed that to accept his food would be to surrender. But her body, aching and weak, begged otherwise. She stared at the tray like it was a puzzle she could not solve. Finally, she reached for the bowl. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, not from submission, but from a mix of curiosity and desperation. The warmth seeped into her palms, and the aroma made her stomach tighten. When she tasted it, tears she had held back for weeks threatened to fall. The liquid was simple, ordinary, yet it carried a promise she had not known she longed for. Care. The human watched her quietly. He said nothing, but she felt the acknowledgement in his presence. She was not just surviving. She was being seen, and for a warrior raised in endless battles, that recognition was foreign and unsettling. "Why," she began, her voice cracking slightly, "why would someone like you care about someone like me?" He gave a small, almost sad smile. "Because even enemies deserve a chance to live. Even warriors deserve mercy. And because maybe someday the world might remember that." For the first time since the war began, Sarai felt something stir in her chest that was not anger, fear, or pride. It was something fragile and dangerous, hope. And with hope came questions, doubts, and the realization that perhaps not all strength was measured in battle. That night, alone with the memory of his words, she thought of all the lives lost, all the warriors who had died without mercy. She thought of her squad, of her people, of the endless cycle of bloodshed, and she wondered, what would it mean if humans could be different? What would it mean if this one soldier's choice was not the exception, but a sign of something greater? As the darkness pressed in around her, Sarai made a decision she could not fully understand. She would survive, not only because her body demanded it, but because the human had shown her that there was something worth living for, something beyond pride, beyond orders, beyond war. And in that choice, she felt the first true stirrings of trust, delicate, trembling, but real. The warship drifted through endless space, carrying its scars like Sarai carried hers. Days turned into weeks, and her world became the same metal walls, the same quiet hum of engines, and the same human who entered her cell with food and water. At first, she told herself she was only watching him to find weakness. She convinced herself she would use him, wait for a chance to escape. But with each day that passed, she found her reasons crumbling. She wasn't watching him as a soldier anymore. She was watching him because she wanted to understand. The human never said much. He spoke only when needed, his voice calm and steady, like a river that flowed endlessly. Yet when he did speak, his words carried weight. His silences were not empty. They were filled with something she could not name, something that reminded her of nights on her homeworld when the desert winds carried secrets across the dunes. One evening, after he set down a tray with a bowl of broth, Sarai finally asked the question that had been clawing at her mind. "Do you hate me?" The words came quietly, almost against her will. Her voice was low, stripped of the pride that usually armored it. The human looked at her for a long moment. He did not answer quickly as others might. Instead, he studied her face with an expression that was neither cruel nor distant. When he finally spoke, his tone was soft. "I don't hate you. I don't hate anyone." Sarai blinked, confused. "But I killed your people. My soldiers burned your colonies. We fought until your skies bled fire. How can you not hate me?" The human exhaled slowly, as if her words carried a weight he had been carrying for years. "Because hate is heavy," he said, "and I'm tired of carrying it. I don't hate you. I hate the war. I hate what it makes us become." His words cut deeper than any blade. Sarai felt her throat tighten. For so long she had believed that humans were merciless, that they thrived on vengeance. But here was one telling her the opposite. Here was one choosing to let go of hate. Her hands trembled as she lifted the bowl of broth. The warmth seeped into her palms, and when she tasted it, something inside her cracked. The flavor was simple, savory, warm, human. Yet it carried more than food. It carried care. It carried intention. Her vision blurred, and to her horror she realized tears were stinging her eyes. She had not cried since childhood. Threxian warriors were taught to bury their pain, to turn sorrow into fury. But now, in the quiet of a human warship, with an enemy's food in her hands, she felt her armor break. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "Why show me kindness?" The human leaned back slightly, his expression soft but steady. "Because someone has to. Because if no one shows mercy, then the war never ends. We'll all just keep destroying each other until there's nothing left." Sarai stared at him, struggling to breathe through the knot in her throat. His words echoed inside her louder than the war drums she had once marched to. Mercy. Kindness. These were not weapons she had been trained to understand. Yet now she felt them cutting through her more sharply than any blade. For the first time since her capture, she let her gaze drop. Her claws curled against the metal bowl. She wanted to speak, to confess something, but the words caught like thorns in her throat. Finally, after a long silence, she whispered, "No one in my army ever cared if I lived or starved. They would have left me to die without a thought. But you?" Her voice broke and she lowered her head further. "You are my enemy, and yet you treat me better than my own people ever did." The human did not answer right away. He simply sat quietly, his presence steady, his silence carrying more meaning than words. At last he said softly, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe enemies are just people we never took the time to know." Sarai could not reply. The weight of his words pressed too heavily against her chest. She finished the broth in silence, each sip tasting less like food and more like a promise. A promise that there was something beyond the war. Something she had never been taught to believe in. That night when the cell returned to silence, Sarai lay awake staring at the ceiling. She replayed his words, his tone, the strange kindness in his eyes. She thought of her people, her soldiers, her commanders who had demanded obedience but never offered compassion. And she thought of this human who owed her nothing, yet gave her everything that truly mattered: mercy. And though she did not understand it, she felt her heart shift in ways she could no longer deny. The warship sailed silently across the stars, a vessel full of victories and losses. Yet inside the narrow prison cell, something different was happening. Something neither side of the war had expected. Captain Sarai found herself waiting each day, listening for the sound of boots in the corridor. At first she hated herself for it. She told herself it was weakness, that she was still a soldier and should not care when her enemy appeared. But when the human entered carrying food or water, she felt something strange stir within her chest, something like relief. He was always the same. Calm, quiet, careful. He never raised his voice, never spoke more than a few words unless she asked. Yet slowly his presence filled the silence in a way that made her cell feel less like a tomb. One day, as he set down a tray, Sarai studied him more closely. His uniform was worn, his shoulders heavy with fatigue. She could see lines around his eyes, lines that did not come from age alone but from battles fought, losses endured. For the first time she realized he was not just her enemy. He was a soldier like her, someone who carried wounds even if they were hidden inside. "Tell me," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. "What is your home like?" The human froze at the question. He looked at her, searching her face as if trying to see if she mocked him. But when he found no malice in her eyes, only curiosity, his expression softened. "Green," he said quietly. "My world is full of green. Forests that stretch for days, fields of grass that bend in the wind. We have oceans too, vast waters that roar like thunder when the storms roll in." Sarai listened, her eyes wide. She had never seen oceans. Her home was a world of deserts and rock, where water was precious and guarded fiercely. The way he spoke of his world made it sound like a dream. He continued, his voice gentler now, almost wistful. "There are nights when the sky glows with 1,000 stars brighter than any battlefield. And there are mornings when the sun rises over the horizon, painting the land gold. It's beautiful, worth protecting." His words painted pictures in her mind, and for a moment she forgot she was his prisoner. She forgot the chains of war and saw through his eyes instead. "Why tell me this?" she asked softly. He gave a faint smile, one that did not reach his tired eyes. "Because someone should know that our worlds are more than just battlefields. Someone should remember that there's beauty worth fighting for, not just power." Something in her chest tightened. All her life she had been told that strength came from conquest, from dominance. But listening to him, she began to wonder if true strength came from something else, from protecting, from cherishing, from loving. The days that followed were different. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Sometimes he shared small pieces of his life. How his mother baked bread that filled their home with warmth. How his little sister sang songs at night. How his people told stories under starlight. Sarai, against her will, found herself leaning closer to his words, drinking them in like the broth he brought her. They were nourishment of a different kind, feeding a hunger she had never known she carried. One evening, as he handed her water, their hands brushed for the first time. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She expected him to recoil, to remember that she was his enemy. But he didn't. He only looked at her with that same small, tired smile, the one that said, "I see you. I don't want you to vanish." That night, lying awake on the cold floor, Sarai realized something terrifying. She no longer saw him as only human, only enemy. She saw him as a man, carrying his own burdens, his own grief, his own hopes. And that truth frightened her more than any weapon. For if she could see the humanity in him, then perhaps he could see something in her too. Something more than the monster her people had made her believe she was. The thought unsettled her. It shook the very foundation of her beliefs. Yet at the same time it warmed her in a way no fire ever could. And as she closed her eyes, she whispered a vow she had never imagined making. "I will live. Not just to survive, not just for pride, but because kindness has been given to me and I cannot let it die here."